What convinced Barry Trotz to re-sign Alexandre Carrier to a 3-year deal? And what did Carrier have to give up to get it done? We're going to tell you on today's Locked On Predators podcast.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Predators podcast, and thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are your free daily Nashville Predators podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to kick off this Thursday episode with a shout out to our Locked On Pred heads. Those are our everyday listeners who tune in each and every weekday to talk Nashville Predators hockey with us. We appreciate your support, and we love that we get to spend just a little bit of your day with you. I'm Ann Kimmel. I'm a writer with Penalty Box Radio, and my friends, I have a partner in crime.
You do. I'm Emma Lingen, and I'm the Predators site editor and reporter for the Hockey News.
On today's show, we are going to be talking about Alexandre Carrier. Look, Barry Trotz made some big offseason moves so far this summer, but one of the maybe more surprising decisions was bringing back defenseman Alexandre Carrier. Today, we're going to talk about why we think Carrier is back with the Predators, and we're also going to tell you the big sacrifice Carrier made to get this deal done. Before we dive into all of that, do want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, Emma, one of our favorite topics, or at least favorite nicknamed players, the Viscount Chihuahua, Alexandre Carrier. If you are wondering what in the ever-loving Fruchterman we are talking about, you need to go back and you need to listen to our superlatives episode where we talked about Alexandre Carrier, and bless his heart, he ended up coming out of that episode as a Viscount Chihuahua. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the contract that he just signed. It is a 3-year deal worth $11.25 million, an AAV of 3.75 if my math is right. And it's Thursday, so it's a little bit of a crapshoot if my math is right. But Emma's nodding, so I feel comfortable with that.
We can always ask Spencer Stastny to double check our math if we need. But I think you're on the right track.
100%. He is our go-to for all sorts of number and tax information. But it's a little bit surprising, I think, this signing, Emma, because we had talked about this before, the news came out that Carrier was re-signed. And I don't know that everybody was sure a deal was going to get done with Alexandre Carrier. And of course, nothing personal about that, except it seemed a little bit like Barry Trotz was talking about the defense kind of going in a little bit of a different direction. So how surprised were you that the deal got done, and how did you feel about the term on it?
I'll say I was the initial immediate reaction, I was pretty surprised when I first heard. But the more I kind of marinated on it, I thought about it and I'm like, you know what? This does make sense because number one, with the term, I think 3 years, if you got him at less than $4 million a year, I think that's a win because I think that there are teams who would have paid him for maybe 4.5. I think that's a good deal for the Predators. I also think, the more I thought about it, looking at all of the defensemen on the free agent market this summer, a lot of them are going to get overpaid. And a lot of them, and that's just how the business works. And that's fine. I mean, you look at like Nikita Zadorov, Brett Pesce, Brandon Montour, like all these big name free agent defensemen who are all out getting very overpaid. And then, obviously the Predators went and got Brady Shea, and people think that that's an overpay. That's a separate discussion. But I think bottom line, what Barry Trotz probably saw was, all of these, we could go out and get more or try to get more of these, big fish, or maybe not even a big fish, but maybe like a medium-sized fish that we don't know anything about. Like, we don't know how they're going to fit in the system. We don't know. Or we could pay a little bit less, maybe a slightly lower upside or lower ceiling, but we know what we're working with here. Like, we know that this is a player that plays well in this system, fits well in this system. Andrew Brunette loves him.
Yes, he does. Yeah.
And even though he doesn't quite fit that profile, like you were mentioning, of, maybe we wanted someone with a little bit more size and or maybe with more offense, I think Carrier can provide that offense. At least he has in the past. But I think the initial reaction, like I said, was kind of like, huh, because I think everyone kind of saw it as when the Predators re-signed Dante Fabro, that meant that Alex Carrier was as good as gone.
Yes.
Now a lot of things have changed, obviously, on this roster, and now we're talking about Dante Fabro potentially being out the door as a trade candidate. So really don't know. But I would say overall, I think the fact that the term is good and the fact that they got him for a year is good.
I like what you said about, you mentioned Andrew Brunette really liked him and working in the system. And I do think there is something to be said for keeping a player who already has a year under his belt of adjusting to what Andrew Brunette wants from the defenseman. And there was a huge adjustment. I mean, we saw it even with Roman Josi at the beginning of last season. There was a big adjustment for what Andrew Brunette wanted them to do, how he wanted them to sort of get involved in the style of play. And it took time for everybody to get there. And you think, do you want to start back at square one with somebody when, you are getting a good defender with Alexandre Carrier, maybe not as big as those medium to large fish that are out there, but you've got a guy who's got experience in the system. And the other thing you have to talk about is he and Jeremy Lauzon were, a great, they were a consistent defensive pairing for the Nashville Predators. They spent the most time on ice of any of the defensive pairings that the Predators had last season. Statistically,
and they're besties.
Can we talk about getting a reality show with the Viscount and whatever we are going to decide to call Jeremy Lauzon?
As I've said before, I had a front row seat to this reality show for a season and a half, and they are delightful together. They are truly always together, and it's precious. So I know everyone was kind of laughing and giggling that one press conference when Bruno kind of slipped that in, and he was like, yeah, I think they're besties. And everyone was like laughing at that. It's like, no, he's right. They are.
Yeah, he's not lying. I think it's Andrew Burnett saying the word besties that really threw the room off.
Yeah.
It's not lingo you expect.
No.
But I do think the year of experience that he had with Brunette, I think the year of experience he had with Lauzon make it more appealing to keep somebody who is familiar, somebody who has chemistry with another defenseman. I don't necessarily think that it's a guarantee that Lauzon and Carrier will stay together. I think, we're going to talk about this a little bit later. I think there may be some shifting with the defense, but I do think the experience that he had this last year with Brunette really changed his value a little bit, in that, like, we don't have to bring a new guy in and get him up to date. Now they're going to have to do that with Brady Shea, but you can do that with one player. If you do that with two defensemen, three defensemen, then you're really almost starting from square one with your blue line. And that's not where the Nashville Predators want to be next season.
No, and that's exactly right. Like, obviously the system is hard and it's different and it's taxing on everyone, but I think the defense especially has, had to make that adjustment like you were talking about, and the fact that, Andrew Brunette wants them to be quick on their feet and to get back and, then join the rush on offense as well. And it's a lot. And it's maybe, again, it's a lot to expect out of your defenseman. And if you have a guy in your system who, plays well in that system and understands the assignment, and that you can get him, for the hometown discount, then you might as well just keep him.
Yep, absolutely. Coming up, we're going to hear from Alexandre Carrier. We had media availability with him yesterday talking about his new contract. He's also going to share the really big thing that he had to give up to get this deal done. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, Emma. So we got a chance to hear from Alexandre Carrier yesterday. He kind of shared his feelings on this signing, what this experience was like. We're going to hear a couple of different quotes from him today that he shared yesterday with him. But I just want to play sort of his overview of getting this deal done in free agency.
It was a stressful situation, not knowing where you're going to end up and all that. But we didn't make it to July 1st. We actually signed a few days earlier, which made July 1st way easier for me. But no, I think it's part of the process, the business side of it. Of you never know what's going to happen, and for me, it was my first time becoming a free agent. So I was stressed. I was nervous, but at the end of the day, I was very happy we made it back to Nashville.
This was his first time kind of getting to that free agency point. And this was not an easy last few months of the season for Alexandre Carrier, because if you remember at the trade deadline, we are so used to Dante Fabro's going to get traded. Like, that's just sort of a staple comment that you hear at the trade deadline. But at the trade deadline last season, it was Alexandre Carrier who seemed like he was going to be the player that would go. And I think that there were definitely moments where those of us kind of in the media around the team and the fan base were like, he's not going to be here at the end of the year. And they waited until just a couple days before July 1st to get this done. So definitely a more challenging time, I think, for Alexandre Carrier.
Yeah, I mean, what were we saying at the trade deadline? One thing is going to happen for sure, and that's Tyson Barrie is going to get traded. And then the other thing that maybe not as certain, but is probably going to happen, is Alex Carrier is going to get traded. Neither of those things happened. Instead,
Crazy.
Yakov Trenin got traded. So we were a little off on that, but no, I mean, it wasn't just a one-sided thing. Teams had expressed interest in Carrier, and teams were willing to offer probably what they felt was a lot. Clearly, Barry Trotz didn't think it was enough. And it was funny because I think Barry Trotz called Carrier an own rental once they kept him at the deadline. And now it's funny because they've signed him for 3 more years. It's like, well, that's a little bit more than a rental, but we'll take it. And I think with the way that, like I said, with the way that free agency shook out and the contracts that these defensemen were getting, I think that they were able to get Carrier at a reasonable price, and I think that, I mean, I'm not anticipating this happening, but I think that contract that he's on, that is a movable contract if they do decide they want to trade him in a year or two. I'm not saying I think that's going to happen, but you're not locked into this, obscene amount of money that nobody wants to take. Even if you had to retain a little bit on it, like, you're really that's a movable contract. So I think that overall the Preds did a good job with this one.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about it being a movable contract, because you do have to keep that in the back of your mind when you're signing players. You want to keep them, but you need to be able to get something for them if it's not the right fit. And I do think you're right. This is a really good contract that another team would take on. One of the areas of his game, just kind of looking back at this past season, because this past season really was sort of a prove it season for Alexandre Carrier, because of course he was injured so much the season before, and they re-signed him for a year, and it was kind of like, okay, let's really see what you've got. But one of the areas that I noticed in his game that I felt like was so much better, or that stood out more, is I really feel like defensively, you noticed like he was much better defensively with his stick. I feel like he was better positionally. And the other thing is, and this was really surprising to me, Alexandre Carrier blocks a ton of shots. Third in block shots on the team behind Yossi and McDonough. And I really feel like when you look at his play 5-on-5, and then when you look at, hey, you know what, this was a guy who became a reliable regular penalty killer, you know, his signing, and this is something we've heard from Barry Trotz, it also is another piece that helps define special teams roles. Okay, we've re-signed a guy that we are used to seeing on the penalty kill as well. So I do think he showed some really good things last season that make this signing make sense.
Yeah, definitely. And he's a team first guy, and he will, he maybe doesn't have that size that McDonough has, but he plays big for how small he is. And
Yes.
I think that, he'll work hard, and I have to wonder too, like this past season, like you said, it was a prove it year for him. And I wasn't sure. Like I thought he did fine. Like
Yes.
he didn't like write himself off, but I was like, it's fine. But I don't know that, again, hearing what he could potentially make on the free agent market with another team maybe that needed a defenseman with some offensive upside. I'm like, well, I don't think the Predators are going to pay him that. So like, I think that it does make more financial sense to just sign Dante Fabro for one more year at 2.5 million and then cut ties with Carrier. So I was surprised. But like I said, that was the initial thought. But then the more I thought about it, I was like, you know what? This really does make sense.
Mm-hmm. He did talk earlier in the clip we showed about just how stressful this time was. And I want to play another clip. I thought this was so interesting because this was sort of his first time at the trade deadline being one of the names around the league that's being circulated. I don't know where I'm going to go. I don't know if I'm going to get a call from Barry Trotz. I don't know what's going to happen. And then you go into free agency and not 100% sure what the deal is going to be. This is what Carrier had to say about just sort of navigating the stress of the end of the season and free agency.
That was a challenge this year for sure. I think I've learned from the past though. Just my second year with the Preds, I was on that was my last year of my contract, so I knew I had to resign. So I kind of struggled that year to finding a way to being the present and then not thinking about contract situation. This year was different because you added, the trade rumors at the trade deadline and all that stuff. It was definitely a challenge, but I've been working with a guy that's back in Montreal, a mental coach that I talk almost on a daily or weekly basis, and you kind of just you put everything in perspective. I'm really lucky to be playing hockey, and sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, but it's all stuff that you cannot control. So I was just trying to be in the present as much as I could. Meditation. I know Roman talks a lot about meditation, but I think we have a lot of guys that use it in the room. So I was doing that a lot and really trying to enjoy myself and being in the present. Yeah.
I love when professional sports or professional athletes, and we've heard this from a number of Nashville Predators. I love when they talk about the mental component of the game, because it's very easy from the outside looking in to say, you make millions of dollars. How hard can this be? Well, it is really hard when you feel like my life could be uprooted. I don't know where I'm, could be playing in a week. I don't know who my teammates are. I don't know. And I think it's really interesting to hear him talk about like, hey, I work with this mental coach. I also do meditation. Alex Doherty, our friend, did an article talking about Roman Yossi and his off season, and he spends a lot of his off season doing meditation. So I just thought that was really interesting that Alexandre Carrier is like, look, yeah, it's stressful, and here's how I managed it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, another thing to point out too, that, he talked about that year being the last year of his contract, but also he lived through the mass, fire sale of the
Yeah.
2022-23 season. He saw it. I remember talking to everyone. I was part of the team at that point too. And I remember talking to everyone, and there was just, whether they wouldn't admit it because that's not professional to do that, but there was fear in that
Yes.
locker room. There was fear in every single one of those guys because they saw, Mikhail Granlund, Matthias Ekholm, Tanner Jeannot. When you see, I will never forget the sight of Tanner Jeannot crying in the Arizona locker room because he just found out he had been traded. Like when you see that, and that puts fear into all of your players, because all of these guys, I remember talking to Matt Duchene, ironically, at the time. He did make it through the rest of the season, but he really thought that he was like, I don't know if I'll be here tomorrow. Like it was scary to see that. So like Carrier lived through that and he survived that. And I remember talking to guys afterwards, they were kind of joking about it after the fact, but it's like, yeah, no, we all almost got fired. Like we all almost lost our jobs. And so he probably saw that and was, that probably sticks in your brain too, I would think.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing. And again, people say, well, you're making millions of dollars. Like that makes up for the fact that, you have to uproot your life. And, Alexandre Carrier getting married this summer. So, he's starting his own small family with his fiance and stuff. I mean, that's a lot of change coming his way. So I just thought it was really interesting that he was willing to talk about like, hey, this is a tough aspect of it. It is part of the business, but this is how I dealt with it. Coming up, we are going to talk about the one big thing that Alexandre Carrier had to sacrifice to get this deal done. We're going to talk about that coming up. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Friends, my youngest son just turned 20 over the weekend, and he is a music guy with very eclectic taste in music. I do want to brag, though. I hit the gift giving out of the park with tickets to see Def Leppard and Journey at Nissan Stadium later this month. And my friends, it was a quick and stress-free process with Gametime. Gametime has killer last-minute deals. They show all-in prices, give you a view from your seat, and with their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets for concerts, sports, theater, comedy, and more. With the Gametime app, I got to see exactly where he would be sitting, and there was no surprise fee at checkout. Gametime also comes with ticket coverage. On my purchase, it's covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying those birthday concert tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Emma. So we have Alexandre Carrier coming back. We have Brady Shea added to this defense core. How do you see the defense shaking out? I know it's very hard to say, like, here are the defensive pairings as I see them, but just overall, what are you expecting from the blue line this season? And do you want to make any lineup predictions? I'm just throwing it out there.
No, you know what? The Ryan McDonough, Matthias Ekholm situation made me, that's what taught me never to make predictions, because
Yes.
everyone was saying that when the Preds traded for McDonough, they're like, oh, boom, they got their second pairing. He's going to be perfect alongside Matthias Ekholm. Ekholm will switch to the other side and it'll be great. It was not great.
It was not great.
It was very short-lived. It did not work. And so it was like, all right, well, back to the drawing board on that one. So I think, again, the only defenseman who I'm comfortable predicting could potentially switch sides would be Roman Josi, because he doesn't even play a side. He's everywhere. So that's nothing for him. But I also think, if you sign a guy like, and people were talking about, oh, could it be Josi and Fabro? Potentially, because Fabro and Josi actually have been a very effective pairing in the past. However, you don't go out and sign Brady Shea for $49 million to put him, to bury him in your defense core. So if I had to guess, I would think it would be Shea and Josi on the top pairing, with Josi switching over to the right. I think it would be Carrier and Lauzon. I think it makes sense. And then that leaves Stastny and Schenn as your third pairing, with Fabro maybe being the odd one out there.
Yeah. I agree with you. I do think you've got to save a spot for Spencer Stastny. I like him with Luke Schenn. And I am with you. I really think that they're going to certainly try. I think that the try out of the gate at training camp is likely to be Josi and Shea. But again, like you said, with the Ekholm and McDonough pairing, you've got to wait and see how it works. And you've got to see, how does Brady Shea adjust to this system as well. And playing with Roman Josi, because Roman Josi is sort of a different defensive creature as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what Andrew Brunette tries right away at training camp, and to see what clicks with them. I do want to share the very interesting story that Alexandre Carrier talked with us about, getting this contract done. It was very stressful. Free agency, very, very stressful. When it came time to wrap up this contract and to make sure that it got done, it required a huge sacrifice from Alexandre Carrier. We have mentioned the Viscount is besties with Jeremy Lauzon. Well, Jeremy Lauzon's bachelor party was over the weekend before free agency. And Alexandre Carrier, who was a part of planning the bachelor party, part of paying for the bachelor trip, had to bow out at the last minute. This is what he said about missing his bestie's bachelor party.
So it was his bachelor trip that weekend, the free agency weekend. So I was supposed to go on the trip. I was in the group chat. I was, paying for all that stuff. We were splitting and stuff. And I was really excited to go there. But I told him that same week, I was like, man, I haven't signed yet. I don't think I can, fly there and party and partying and make a decision from probably the biggest decision of my life, So he understood it. But obviously when I signed, I think it was a Saturday, when I signed this Saturday, I called him immediately, and he was really happy. So I guess it worked out that I stayed back, because I went back to Nashville, so it was exciting.
So now I have a question. I would just like to know, did he get his money back if he was paying for it? Again, as someone who has been part of many a bachelorette party, they are not cheap. Even if you think that, oh, we all split it, 10 ways and it'll be cheap. It's not, because you're also paying for everything that the bride wants too. So I'm just saying, I would like to know, Jeremy Lauzon, did you refund your bestie his money? Now granted, maybe he doesn't care as much because he's about to make a lot more money, but still, as you said, money isn't everything. I would like to know, just on the principle of the thing.
Did you get your money back?
Yeah. I think it's a valid question.
I think that's a fair question. When you talk about like, hey, Carrier, you've got a little bit of money to burn now that you signed this, over $11 million contract. So in the media, Alex Doherty asked Alexandre Carrier, like, is there like a big purchase that you've been wanting to make that you're going to make now that you signed this contract? And Alexandre Carrier is like, no, I'm pretty conservative with my money. So Emma and I were like, what do we think Alexandre Carrier's big purchase would be if he were to make one? Emma, what do you think Alexandre Carrier would buy to like celebrate this big new deal?
I feel like, so when we were in Prague for the Global Series, and we were the hotel we were in was nearby the street, and now I can't remember the name of the street, but it's essentially like the Rodeo Drive of Prague, where it was like all of the like big fancy designers were on the street. And I remember distinctly passing Carrier in the hotel lobby on our off day, and I was like, "Oh, are you going to do some shopping?" Because and like clearly all that stuff's out of my price range. So I'm like, "Are you going to do some shopping?" And he goes, "Oh, no, it's too expensive for me." And I'm like, "Is it though?
Is it though?
But I'm like, you know what? That's good. Stay humble. It's good. But because of that, I kind of picture him going on like a shopping spree buying, and he's a well-dressed dude. So I can see
does
him
dress well.
like buying like a fancy suit, maybe like a custom suit, something like that, maybe some fancy shoes.
Yes, I can 100%
And
see
then
that.
and then of course his English country estate, as the Viscount.
It's the
Then
Viscount. I know. I was like, well, he's clearly going to buy a castle.
yes.
Clearly. But I lean in on the clothes thing with you because he is a very well-dressed athlete. He dresses very, very well. But I was like, I bet he's going to buy dinner clothes because you know how they dress for dinner. And I'm like,
Yes.
I bet Alexandre Carrier is going to go out and buy like a really nice tux or something so that he can dress for dinner now.
Maybe he'll buy like a really nice dressing gown for when he retires to his chambers.
State. Meanwhile, he's probably like, yeah, no, I'm just going to put it in the bank and I'm not going to buy anything. But these are the things we wonder about Alexandre Carrier / the Viscount Chihuahua.
He did bring up he is also getting married this summer, and he said, he really is just like one of us. It's nice to see the money hasn't changed him, because he's like, yeah, well, I'm getting married and you all know how expensive that is. It's like, yes, we do.
Yes,
so
we
are
do.
bachelor parties. Did you get your money back?
Did you get your money back? I know. I hope that he splurges on a bitchin' ice sculpture for that wedding now that he signed that contract. Like,
yeah,
just splurge on the ice sculpture.
or like a chocolate fountain, or like something completely extravagant.
Yes. At our wedding, we splurged on a balloon bride and groom. Now, I suspect Carrier is going to take it up a notch. But, we'll find out what he does with it. But yeah, Alexandre Carrier back with the Nashville Predators for 3 more years. A surprise, I think, a little bit, but a great deal for the Nashville Predators as well. Coming up on tomorrow's show, friends, it's Fun Friday. You know that we are going to pull out all the stops. We're going to have information and entertainment because it's Friday and we all survived another week. So make sure you tune in to that as well. Before we sign off, Emma, let everyone know where they can find you and your work.
You can find me on social media at Emma_Lingen, and you can find my work at the Hockey News.
And you can find me on social media at AnnK_Mama on Ice. You can find my work at Penalty Box Radio as well. You can follow the podcast on social media, LO_Predators. You can find us on your favorite podcasting platform. And of course, on YouTube, be sure to click that subscribe button so you'll know every time we have a new episode out as well. That's going to do it for this Thursday edition of the Locked On Predators podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We will be back tomorrow with an all-new episode. We'll see you then.